Hello, good morning. Thank you for coming to our very informal preservation panel. It's informal as usual, although the guests are super highly qualified, smart, and very good at what they do. So the guests today are Margaret Bodde, the director of the Film Foundation, Kevin Schaeffer, director of restoration and library management at Disney, and they will be presenting together. We have Skyler Reid, great-grandson of Max Fleischer, who will be talking about Fleischer cartoons and the restoration. And James Mockoski, the restoration director and archive director of Zoetrope. Grover Crisp, Executive Vice President, Asset Restoration, these titles, and Preservation of Sony Picture Entertainment. And then the filmmaker Bill Morrison, who has already been at the cinema several times with Dawson City, with The Flood, and I think even something else that will do a panel and then as a short later on in the afternoon. Margaret and Kevin, you're on.
Thank you. Hello, good morning, everybody. I'll just speak a little bit about the Film Foundation, and Kevin will come up because it's, he only had a little bit of entertainment prepared for this. But I am the executive director of the Film Foundation, a group that many of you know, especially people who have been coming to this festival for the 5 or 6 years that it's been around. And the Film Foundation was created by Martin Scorsese and several of his fellow filmmakers in 1990. And I had the great good fortune of meeting Marty in 1991. And he hadn't really, the Film Foundation it had the seed of the intention was to raise funds and awareness for the need for film preservation, but there was no real idea of how to do that specifically, except that the nitrate holding film archives were a huge part of the organization, and they would be the recipient of those funds. So I've been lucky enough to be able to work with Marty over these past 35 years to really craft programs that we hope and think serve the field of film preservation. To date, the Film Foundation has helped to restore 1,100 films. We realized about 10 years into running the Film Foundation and doing things like the AMC Classic Movie Festival, which was a great program that ran for about 9 years. And in the first decade of the Film Foundation, it really raised significant funds. And more importantly, just a real awareness among the movie-going, movie-loving fans and people who aren't in the industry. It just created this awareness that film is ephemeral. If we don't take care of it, it just can go away. And so I think that was kind of the perfect thing that we were able to accomplish in the first decade, because it really did address that core mission. But we were kind of also realizing that most of the people that we worked with at the archives and at the studios, their preservation departments, were on the older side of things. And we realized that we needed to also introduce and make sure that classic film and film history is available to young people. So we started developing a program, educational curriculum called The Story of Movies. And The Story of Movies was really just to kind of teach the language of cinema and to break down telling a story visually. And it became used in, we engaged educators in our development and really kind of we wanted something that could be used in the classroom. We created film study standards, and it is now utilized by over 150,000 educators across the U.S. We also, in 2007, Marty wanted to take what he had done with the Film Foundation globally. And so we launched the World Cinema Project, and that was basically to address films that were had oftentimes had never been seen outside of their country or region that they were produced in. And in that program, in addition to identifying, restoring, preserving the films, we also took on distribution, because a lot of times these films, like I said, had never really received their a full distribution. So that program has had some incredible discoveries, like a Iranian film, Chess of the Wind, and just so many films that are, if you haven't seen a film, it's new. So it doesn't really matter when it was made. But to date, with World Cinema Project, we've restored 70 films from 32 countries, including 23 films from 12 countries in Africa through our African Film Heritage Program, which we launched in 2017. That's a program that we work in partnership with FIPACI, which is a Pan-African Federation of Filmmakers, and that is the group that identifies the films in need of restoration. Because one thing I've learned working for Marty is he's pretty much seen or heard of any film you could think of. When we got the list of 50 films that were targeted by FIPACI for significant African works that needed to be restored, Marty looked at the list and he's like, yeah, I know 10 of these films. So it really is a case of, like I said, discovery of films. And then so many incredible films have come out of that program. And these films get a new lease on life. They're discovered by audiences that were not aware of them, and we're recognizing filmmakers that had not received their due. And so we're so proud of the World Cinema Project, the African Film Heritage Project, and hopefully the Story of Movies is kind of changing a little bit of the understanding for young people of cinema as a significant art form and a way. Not every kid who takes Story of Movies is ever going to be, a filmmaker or a film critic, but it's something that will enrich their lives. A big part of the Film Foundation, in terms of the advocacy, is working with the major studios. And that was always a huge part of the mission of, the filmmakers, Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and Francis Coppola. And we have, many people on our board now, Guillermo del Toro and Alexander Payne and Wes Anderson and Sofia Coppola, but using the clout that they have to just talk to the studios, the heads of the studios, about the importance of their libraries and their collections, and how vitally important it is to, on the one hand, of course, preserve and restore them, but make them available. Because if people don't see the films, then who cares about them? They have to be able to be seen and programmed by the brilliant Bruce Goldstein at Film Forum and Julia here at Sag Harbor. It's something that with the vast collections, there's a lot of films that are deep in the catalog that need to be, kind of pulled out of there. And we work really closely with, everyone at the archives in the preservation program. And they're as dedicated as the archivists. They really know and love cinema. And when the Film Foundation started in 1990, people like Grover Crisp at Sony, were already aware of the need to build new vaults that were state-of-the-art, and start preservation programs that would be systematic, and they would go through the whole collections and literally open the cans and assess, what elements they had, what were missing. So we flash forward to 2019, and we had a fantastic partnership with Fox, 20th Century Fox, and the great Sean Belston, who is an extraordinary advocate and archivist and technician. He's an incredible asset to film preservation, and he restored so many films from the Fox collection. We had a partnership that the way that the studio partnerships work is that the studios have the funds, and they're responsible for preserving their own collections because they benefit from those. But sometimes these lesser known films need a little advocacy and a little promotion to kind of get out into the world. So with Sean, we restored, we partnered with him to bring out 15 films from the Fox library. And the first two were, they were originally shot on 3-strip Technicolor films, but they had those nitrate films had been lost or destroyed over the years. And something called CRIs had been made, which are kind of notoriously a much lesser element to work from. But Sean, we worked on Drums Along the Mohawk, a great John Ford film, his first color film, and Leave Her to Heaven, which is another extraordinary 3-strip Technicolor film, one of Marty's favorites. And what he did on those CRIs, they looked gorgeous. So we wanted to take that legacy that we had built with Sean and the Fox Library. When Disney acquired Fox, there was just a question of like, can we continue that? Is that something that would be considered? Now, I could make a call and have, who knows? But, Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg made a call to the top of the studio and, just really advocated for, you have this collection, it's been very well preserved and restored, but there's still titles in there that need work. And so from the advocacy of Marty and Steven and their continuing involvement in these restorations, in selecting the films that need to be restored based on the elements and the previous work, and also in discovering films that hadn't been restored yet, literally going through lists, circling lists, having elements, researched and kind of identifying which were the priorities, to looking at restoration tests and, kind of signing off on the restoration work and also, just the final grading and everything. So because of that advocacy so far, and working with Kevin Schaeffer, who's going to come up and talk about our work together, we've so far restored 10 films. You're going to see Duel in the Sun, hopefully, later today, this afternoon. And, it's a partnership that, we combine our efforts on the technical side of things and on making sure that these films get a big celebratory launch after the work is done. So it's really, my pleasure to work with Kevin and Nikki and everyone on the team at Disney. And I'll have Kevin talk a little bit about the specific titles that we've worked on together, and then we're going to show some clips from those films. Thank you so much, and here's Kevin.
Thank you, Margaret. And the Film Foundation has done such amazing work over the years. It's just truly, truly incredible. I brought my notes because I want to stay focused. Okay, what time? 11:18. All right. I don't want to set this whole thing off. So, as Margaret mentioned, the Film Foundation has a long history with Fox. Our relationship only goes back a few years once we started working on things with Disney. But that said, Disney does have a history of restoring our animated classics. And it's funny, Bruce and I were just talking about this last night. You may remember there was the Walt Disney program where an animated classic would come out, ballyhooed, and it would be available a very short period of time, then it would go back into the vault for 7 years. And each year you'd get a different one. But what that did was it made a huge release that was an event for each of those films as a new generation came along. It was wonderfully successful. Now everything is streaming all the time. So that's it. So when high definition was introduced, then it brought a need to restore some of these things because the picture quality, the detail was so much better than ever before. So we started going back and revisiting some of those titles. And in 2009, we began an official formal program of restoring at least one animated classic a year. And once that got going, we started adding in major live action titles as well. So we thought we were done because it could never look any better and life is great and we'll just move on. And then came high dynamic range and ultra high def with even better detail and more information and the ability to actually capture the full spectrum of color and luminance that's in your film elements, which means we're going back again now on some titles on the Disney. been there 33 years. There are some titles that I'm doing for the third time, which is kind of fun because you know where the problems are hiding. I am so far off script, I have no idea where I should be. So the improvement, it's led us to revisit several titles that we've done in the past, such as our award-winning Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which you've not seen in the last 2 years, please do. It's gorgeous. And our critically and commercially successful Cinderella, Tombstone, Tron, Planet of the Apes, which we showed here last year. In the last few months, we've had limited theatrical releases of our gorgeous, if I say so myself, restorations of The Sound of Music and Rocky Horror Picture Show. Wouldn't that be a fun double bill? But these are all very well-known, popular films that generally come with their own fan base attached. And that's great. There's no guarantees in the marketplace, but at least that you'll make back some of your investment in restoration, which is nice. From a profit and loss statement, that helps cover some ground. But that does bring us to our partnership with the Film Foundation, because there are films that don't have that big contemporary fan base waiting for it, though they should be waiting for Duel in the Sun, but we'll grow them. The Film Foundation, they encourage a focus on the timeless classics and making them available to view in the best possible situation, the best possible way. And we do believe there is an audience for these films, both young and old, of people who want to see and experience these classics that have basically built our culture. So we truly believe if you build it, they will come. Mr. Scorsese, Mr. Spielberg are more than just the founders of the organization and figureheads, but as she said, they're very involved in this work queue, and they have championed, it took me a while to come up with that word, they have championed investment into our extensive Fox catalog and some of our Selznick International titles, which might otherwise not receive that same attention. So that's critically important. Mr. Scorsese, as she said, has provided a list of titles that he feels should be prioritized, though he and Margaret have been incredibly gracious about a couple of my suggestions. Thank you. Not all of them, but sometimes I go a little off the beam. But I do work from his list as I pull together our slate of what we're doing each year. So he has the list. We go through. The Disney team will do the research into all the potential source assets. We have found that we don't always have those in our inventory, but frequently we do need to borrow assets from other archives, such as the Museum of Modern Art, UCLA Film and Television Archive, the BFI, the British Film Institute. It's a really lovely symbiotic relationship there. We move all the picture elements to all the ones that we think are the right ones, to Cineric Incorporated in New York. They have a long history of working with the Film Foundation, and in fact, the founder, Balazs Nyari, is here, as he is every year, for the festival. So the team at Cineric will often evaluate the potential film assets to help identify which are the best sources. Ideally, if we can get the best preserved original print, we'll screen that for the team so we all know what it should look like when we come out the other end, because technology today, you can do anything. Sometimes you just shouldn't. So it's good to know what it was intended to look like initially. I'm off script again. So after that, Cineric's incredible artists proceed with the color grade and setting the luminance, as well as cleaning and restoring every frame. And let me remind you, there are 24 frames per second. So it's a lot of frames. When they're done, they will send a copy of that to our restoration managers in California. We'll review it. We'll come back with notes and changes and things we'd like to see. They'll incorporate that, and then they send it to Margaret, or Margaret comes in, actually, and she will provide her notes and revisions, and then it's sent to Mr. Scorsese and Mr. Spielberg, and they will also give their notes. So it really is a bi-coastal working partnership, which is really fantastic, because you're getting the best of everybody on each side. And as I say that, I don't actually do anything. I've got a great team that does this work, so I don't want to sound like I'm taking credit for their work. I just swoop around and yell faster, faster, cheaper, cheaper. So, but I'm off script. So, after the restoration is complete, Margaret and her wonderful team are tireless advocates for this work, recommending features to film festivals around the world to ensure that the film receives as much notice and the widest audience possible. And now, when you're working with film elements this old, there's always the possibility of a problem, and these are the challenges that we love and sometimes come to hate. We have encountered a few films with decomposition in the negative, requiring that we thought we found the best thing, and now we've got to find the second best thing to replace those sections of footage. One case in particular, Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, we had to pull shots from 5 different film sources to get everything without as little damage as possible. And then poor Danny and Seneric had to find a way to make them all match each other. So that's great. A couple of favorite challenges, then I will wrap this up because I think I'm over time. Really fast. So Blood and Sand. The best existing film source that is available in the world is, as Margaret mentioned, a CRI, a color reversal intermediate protection that was made in the 1970s. The red layer was soft due to a contact printing error, resulting in all subsequent masters after that point not having the full range of color. Given the technology today of high dynamic range, Seneric was able to digitally recreate that missing color and bring the image back to full, glorious Technicolor, as you will see momentarily in our clip reel. Also, really fun one, Under Two Flags, 1936, successful film, great. Fox then later went back and cut out several minutes of it to make it work better as a second half of a double bill. And normally those elements were very carefully monitored, tagged, archived, put away. This clump somehow went missing. About 15 years earlier, Sean Belston, who was amazing and wonderful, and I love to this day, had done a lot of research, and the best element he could find for the missing footage was a dark and grainy 16 millimeter print that a private collector had. And in all of my hubris, I said, oh, well, we won't have to use that. I know people at film archives. We reached out to every film archive in the world. No one has that footage. So I went back to Sean's notes, and I found that nice man's name and phone number. He loaned us his element. We scanned it. Again, Seneric did their best to make it match, but there's such a huge quality difference between the 35 and the 16. It doesn't quite flow as seamlessly, but it really is amazing to put it all back together again. And what an amazing and wonderful technical challenge. So that was great fun. I'm way over. So we will conclude now with a brief clip highlighting the titles that we've done together in our brief but lovely partnership. So thank you very much.
And now Skyler Fleischer.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, we were talking about everyone having those impressive titles, and mine is great-grandchild. So I'm working on that. I also have notes to hopefully keep me on track. But yes, my name is Skyler Fleischer Reid, and I am one of Max Fleischer's great-grandsons. You might know him. I think that means I'm technically related to Betty Boop, but that gets somewhat complicated there. I think it's a bit of, and we have all said this a million times these days, of there is just so much more video now than there ever used to be. Video is constantly being made. And for people personally having footage of their families, like that's much more common. But for, anyone my age, older, etc., it's actually still probably pretty uncommon to have much footage of, say, your grandparents, let alone great-grandparents. And I am in the very weird, privileged position that I actually have quite a bit of footage of my great-grandfather. Also in the weird position that sometimes the footage involves him dressed as a toy soldier being shot at with cannonballs. Which is a bit of a weird experience when you're looking at these things and you realize that, oh right, I'm related to that guy. So, yeah, that. My family is a little bit weird. So when I was asked to come and speak on this panel, I was asked to talk a bit about just kind of the Fleischer history. What is the history of Fleischer Studios and the Fleischer cartoons, which really, weirdly, is just my family history and is something that I have been learning more and more about in recent years. For restoration purposes. And it's always very weird when you read about your own family in someone else's book. But anyway, going back a little bit, early 20th century, the 5 Fleischer brothers, Max and Dave, had been born actually in Poland, but at this point The five brothers, including Charles, Joseph, and Louis, all lived in New York City, and they were truly enamored with the great engineering marvels of the time. This is when people are looking at the bridges and the skyscrapers and all of that, and they were very much technically interested. They also were the sons of a tailor, and so they were just trying to find different ways to make money, make income, etc. Turns out a lot of them also have artistic elements that would later play into the studio that they would eventually found. Louis was actually a musician on top of being a very technically minded person, and he oversaw a lot of the musical elements, musical accompaniment to the early films. Dave, who was one of the two founders along with Max, was a performer. He was the director once the studio started, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Before that, he was a performer in many ways, including being a Coney Island clown. That is actually where all of that comes from. So there are a lot of different skill sets. Of course, Max then was an animator. He was an illustrator at first. He actually paid money to the Brooklyn Daily Eagle so that he could come in and draw cartoons for the paper. This was around 1904, I think. Don't quote me on that. But he did several comic strips. This is where he met John Bray and became kind of involved in early animators. Like these, this was the beginning. It was a very small pool of people. They were all running around and kind of, as they got bigger, stealing each other's employees and all of that fun stuff. But early on, Max was very interested in the technical challenges of animation. And when they started when he and Dave started Out of the Inkwell, the Out of the Inkwell studio in 1921, this is actually a little later when they had more staff. When they started it, they were very much they started up coming up because of technical ability. Max Fleischer invented the rotoscope to start showing realistic human motion in cartoons. The first cartoon, the rotoscope, the first cartoon they made with the rotoscope was actually not this one, but it was traced over a year, taking over the family living room of Dave in his Coney Island clown suit, and getting the and that got the attention of Bray. That brought in more people. That kind of got Max into the animation industry. In 1921, they started Out of the Inkwell Studios, partially using a sum of money from Max's wife Essie that don't quite know where it came from. She was a big gambler, so it was probably poker. But that is kind of the origin story of Fleischer Studios. And later on, they would become Fleischer Studios. They would start distributing with Paramount, but they had a lot of big characters. They started off technical, but eventually they started some other kind of well-known characters who I might be wearing on a sweater right now. Their big hit out of 1930, which was after they had changed to Fleischer Studios, was, of course, the one and only Betty Boop, who was originally a dog lounge singer, in case you didn't know that. The ears eventually morphed into hoop earrings, and she became much more of the Betty Boop we know and love today. The studio then went on to continue kind of having big hits. They moved into a larger studio at 1600 Broadway in New York City. That's where that earlier photo is from, which is now the M&M shop. But that's where it was originally. That's, and then eventually they have kept having bigger and bigger hits. Obviously, Betty was a major player in that, but there were also some pretty big characters that you might know. They did the original Popeye cartoons, and innovated even further. They used 3D sets and different technologies to create amazing backgrounds to these that you can see. In 1941, after the studio had moved to Florida, which was to have more space so they could make a motion picture, Gulliver's Travels. They also did the early Superman cartoons. I personally love seeing these restored footage, and I will get to some of that, because I remember watching these Superman cartoons as a kid on a VHS in Grandpa's study, and I swear I thought Superman's suit was green. That's just the color we saw. And that kind of brings the point of the studio is very successful, but in 1941 was acquired by Paramount. And while a lot of these original films were then kept or put in the vaults, as it were, there was also a lot of the early out of the Inkwell Studios film reels that were just discarded. No one was planning to have TV for this stuff in 1921. It's just went out. Various rumors of bonfires have been made. I'm not spreading rumors. But this whole thing was that there was all this film out there, and while some of it is preserved, and yes, the studio closed, but Fleischer Industries has continued on. The characters are still prominent. But like, I imagine like me, you never really saw the good, high-quality original film being shown. And almost no one had for decades at this point. It was getting to be pretty bad quality with what you could find. Most of what I saw was stuff that was VHS to VHS to VHS. And that kind of gets to why I'm here. I'm hoping some of you have had an opportunity to see some of the restorations that are currently being done, that are being shown by our wonderful hosts here. And that's the story of Fabulous Fleischer Cartoons Restored, which is about 4 years ago. My mom got, I guess, an email from a licensee, someone who sells various Fleischer products. He had seen some neat stuff, but he wanted to find some of the weird, the Fleischer weird, because Fleischer was known for being surreal and strange, and he was seeing a lot of success in that. Shout out to my friend Mauricio Alvarado, who runs Rockin' Pins and has absolutely been an engine keeping us all going. He reached out to my mom and said, where are some of these old films? And my mom, in her incredibly smart way, did not tap dance around it and just said, I have no idea. Because it turns out no one really had any idea. These film reels had been lost for decades and decades and decades. And so they started looking. This is something I don't think was really a possibility much earlier. It's easy to forget that. But with social media and the communities that are built around these cartoons and around film restoration, it's a lot easier to reach out to groups of people and say, hey, we're looking for this. Oh, you mentioned that you have this. You're interested in this. Who else can I talk to try and find some of this material? Because this material, yes, some of it was being kept in the vault, and a lot of it was being kept under someone's bed in Siberia. Like, we just don't, it's literally, I came home once and Mom and Mauricio were just in the living room with boxes and boxes and boxes of 16 millimeter film reels that they had gotten from a guy who had to clear out his garage because his kid said, you have to clear out the garage. And that's where this stuff is coming from right now. So we're getting these original film reels and we're getting them scanned. We've had amazing partners who have helped support this, like the Film Foundation. We've had amazing restorers who have actually helped do the restoring. We have all of these things going on, really just so that we can get these cartoons back out in public the way they were meant to be seen. Because really, I grew up seeing the one on the left. I didn't know it could look like it looks on the right.
At the Cobweb Hotel. You find that the service is well.
This is a job for Superman.
I definitely saw a way worse copy of that. Yeah, and so this is what the family's been doing. And I say family a lot because that's really what it is. From back in the days when it was 5 brothers running a studio, putting their various talents together, to, you know, my grandfather taking over the reins and overseeing the reemergence of Betty Boop as a huge cultural icon in the late 80s, to my uncle Mark, who is now running the company through some of our most, you know, successful years in decades. You know, there was a little Broadway play that we just did, which I am happy to say, I'm now allowed to say, will be going on a national tour starting in 2020, at the end of 2026. So if you didn't catch it first, you will have more opportunities. Please do. Not for me, because it's just very good. But yeah, and now my mom is running this. She was not planning on having a new full-time job. She was retired. She did not want to. But this is why we do it, because it's important to get this stuff out there. And what's been really interesting for me personally is that I never really used to talk about this. This was a fun party fact I could pull out and just tell someone who had known me for years, and then be like, and by the way, you know Betty Boop? Now picture this face every time you see Betty Boop. Like, this is just where the family is. And as Mom and Mauricio and an incredible team that I'm not going to try and name because I will forget someone and it will be sad, have been doing all this work. I will mention my cousin is helping out. I'm here. This is still a family thing. And what's been interesting is, as I bring this up to people, I hear more and more about their childhood memories, about how Popeye versus Sinbad is their favorite childhood film, about my friend who was actually only allowed to watch Koko cartoons because they were considered more acceptable, like not quite as risque as other cartoons. And all I can think is she did not see all the Koko cartoons. This is, you know, this is my great uncle Dave being traced over in his Coney Island clown suit. And so that is my family's history. But the reason we're doing this is because it's also everyone else's family history. And I think the reason we're all here at this festival in general is because we either know these films, we know this content, we remember this content, but being able to actually see it the way it's supposed to be seen, see it properly restored, seeing it on a big screen is awesome. Even when it's just something a little bit weird, like seeing your great-grandfather dressed up as a toy soldier being shot at with cannonballs. Thank you.
Thank you, Skyler. And by the way, one of the Fleischer cartoons that was missing is just recently been found by Joe Loro. Our own Joe Loro is around here, and we screened it the other day. James, I think it's here. Jay Mockoski.
Oh, I got this microphone. First off, I want to say to Skyler, thank you. You know, I had that same experience. The image on the right is how I grew up watching those films. And it's amazing because I think I've seen these films for the very first time. And my son, who was 9, when he first met Jane, I have the luxury of living next to his mother in Berkeley. And we went to see some of the Fleischer cartoons, and he bought a Koko the Clown shirt, and he wears it to elementary school, and people are like, well, who the hell is this, you know, and what are you wearing? But he at least gets to educate people what these films should look like. So I appreciate the effort of doing this, because it really just shows you how a bad presentation really sours you. And so anyway, that was off script. So put the microphone to the mouth, right? Is that what you're trying to say? Okay, keep advancing. Keep marching forward. There we go. Okay, so why I'm here today. Julia had a wonderful festival in Venice, and she sat down with Francis at the Venice Film Festival. He was there to give Herzog his award, and they sat down and they had a lovely conversation about Cotton Club. And so she really, really wanted Francis to come here and to introduce Cotton Club. And, well, he's working on his other film. So I talked myself into, well, you know, I'm not as sexy as Francis, but I could do a talk about Cotton Club. And she was gracious enough to say, okay. I put her in an awkward position. It worked. But she said, well, you know, what would be nice to talk about is how did Francis get into? He's sort of, I don't know, one of the rare people, but he owns his own film collection. One of the rare filmmakers that actually own their own collection of films, and how he got into sort of revisiting his films. You can't start this conversation until you understand where we began. And it was in 1969. It was San Francisco. It was abandoning Hollywood. It was not wanting to make films in Hollywood. But him and his friend George Lucas, who they met on the set of Finian's Rainbow, decided they want to make their own films. They did not want to make films for the studios. So they started collaborating together and found themselves up in San Francisco. And in December 12th, 1969, they formed American Zoetrope. Well, between 1969 and I would say the 90s, they made a few films. So our story really begins, and I want to say it was George Lucas, and I want to mention George Lucas because I think he was sort of the inspiration that sort of led Francis to why I'm here and talking to you guys today, is he had those Star Wars films. And those Star Wars films, he came back in the 90s and revisited all the films, did recuts of all the trilogy, and then did all his prequels. But seeing that success, Francis wasn't undone. He was like, you know, I could do that too. So he started, you know, Apocalypse Now. He's like, you know, in 1979, I was forced by UA to do certain things. I was 3 years in making this film. It was, as I said with Cotton Club in the beginning a couple of days ago, it was a war. This was one of these films that he went over the edge on. And he said, well, he had to make compromises. He had to make compromises to the studios to get it to be released in 1979. However, 30 years later, he said, well, maybe the film, I can make the film back. It seems like an audience is willing to come with George and revisit some of his films, and maybe people will come back and see Apocalypse Now, but in the form that I originally wanted to demonstrate in 1979. And he would say, well, you know, what I wanted in 1979 would have been too weird. And that's saying a lot for the 1970s, because there were a lot of weird things that Francis did. But he added 45 minutes back to the film, and which did very, very well. It also started creating a dialogue with people. What version did they like? Was the French plantation? You know, so people had strong opinions about it. But it was great because people really, really did engage with the film, and it was very popular. So then he said, well, why don't we start revisiting my other collection of films? So from one battle to the next, and people forget that Apocalypse Now was the first sort of film that got him bankrupt. So One from the Heart really sank him into with the banks and so he said, well, let's try One from the Heart. The problem with One from the Heart that he found with Apocalypse Now, and Kevin and everyone, it's the same story, is the elements get scattered. You know, they sit around for 30 years, however long, and they get scattered to the four corners of the earth. Apocalypse Now was no different. So I was brought on board during the One from the Heart first recut. I say first recut because Francis is always revisiting. I was brought on board because Apocalypse Now was scattered between salt mines in Pennsylvania, warehouses, 3 or 4 warehouses in Los Angeles where people would be barbecuing indoors, And so Francis decided, well, maybe we needed to rein in all our stuff because Apocalypse Now was pretty difficult to find all the elements and to recut it to the redux form of the 45 minutes that we were missing. So One from the Heart, I was brought on board to start reining in all the elements. And this was particularly challenging because One from the Heart, I would liken, it was never finished. People think they saw it in '82, they saw it at Radio Music Hall, but there were 3 different versions of One from the Heart. So I would liken it was never complete. What most people saw, if they ever saw One from the Heart, would have been the 70mm release, which ultimately got onto home video and Laserdisc. So I'll leave that alone because we're going to come back to One from the Heart, because I would still say that in 2000 when I came, it was still unfinished. But Outsiders was our big one because it's different. Some things are where the artist, the filmmaker, feels that the film's unfinished. But then there are cases where he was quite happy with the original cut of The Outsiders, but the fans wanted more. How Outsiders started was a letter from Fresno, California, a librarian, Mockoski, and got their students together to petition Francis to make The Outsiders. Which, after One from the Heart, selling off his studio, he got out of Hollywood, went to Tulsa, Oklahoma to shoot Outsiders. 30 years later, he still is getting letters from fans. Why didn't you have this scene? Why didn't you have this scene? And so they really wanted to understand why Francis didn't make more of the complete novel. He was original and said, well, people were familiar with the text, so I could make some leaps. But he said, well, maybe this gives me a chance to do something different. So he also added about 20 minutes to make it the complete novel. So this is a very interesting thing, too, is also what I was saying about Apocalypse. It creates a dialogue with fans. There are people so passionate about the original version. And they were like, how could you touch your father's score? And they removed the score, which was a very Gone with the Wind sound, a very epic sound. And Francis decided in 2005 he wanted something more contemporary, Elvis Presley music, something from the 50s. But people were very upset about that. How could you touch the original? But then you get people from a new generation that had never seen the original, and they really respond well to this new version. And then they have the same reaction. It's like, I prefer the. So it's actually been working very well to have these two different things, and it also engages a new generation that we found. So these 3 experiences were all early 2000s, and we revisited. And I think a lot of the reason we revisit it, is like most studios do, is because of home video. That was the impetus of doing these restorations. DVD was coming out at this time, and Francis was sort of taking a break from filmmaking at that moment. So that's when we started focusing on the DVDs, revisiting the restorations. And then he goes back to filmmaking again for 4 years. He makes Youth Without Youth and Tetro. And then we find ourselves back. Once he's done that filmmaking adventure and done his left turn, he's come back to revisiting again. And this time was Cotton Club. And the reason why I'm here today. So Cotton Club Encore, I'm trying not to repeat myself from Friday, but this was something, again, that was on his mind. It was a film that he did not own, but one that he always really wanted to come back to. And in 2011 is when we were first able to do that. And again, this was another film that he felt was completely unbalanced. He was forced to make decisions that really just affected on one side of the characters, Richard Gere, Diane Lane, but it sort of misses the point. It was Maurice, the brothers, Maurice and Gregory's relationship, and that he really wanted to put the balance back in towards that relationship and not be so one-sided. And so he was very passionate about finding all the elements, which was scattered from Las Vegas, Seattle, all over the place. There was a garage in Burbank that the material was kept. And we were still missing material, and we were missing about 9 minutes of negative. And this is always the sad thing, because I know that if I had a little bit more time, I could find it. And I'm still convinced today that there's somewhere out there that it's there. But sadly, we have a deadline, and we had to get it out. So we found the next best thing, which was the answer print. It was the first sort of the dailies that came in, which the editor would cut. They're never gentle to it. They put grease pencil down the mark of the X's where fades and dissolves should be going. And so that's the only thing I could find. Sarah, if you could run this clip. The amazing thing about, work prints is they're splicey and we're missing frames. So that was the whole heart attack situation, that I couldn't get something for Francis that would ultimately present well. But thankfully, at that time, that was 2015 when we were doing that with Technicolor, and the technology was at a point where we could make it presentable. And we probably could hopefully do a little bit better. And maybe the negative will come to us one day. One thing that's interesting is, as an archivist, and how I was trained was sort of, you want to present that original presentation. What was the original presentation as you saw as a kid or anything was the gold standard. That's the thing you want to preserve. And that is sort of my dialogue with Francis, is to make sure that the original versions are always there and presented. And how these things always come up in these new cuts is when Francis, new technology, now we're in HD land here, and Blu-rays coming around. We're now revisiting these films. We will start the restoration, and he will say, I got an idea. Why don't we do something different? I think I could do it a little bit better this time. So it always is a little bit dangerous starting a restoration with him, because then it opens up the Pandora's box for him. So I always end up with more versions, which was good. It's a good problem. So set a little bit of a side is we just got elements around the time of Cotton Club, Dementia 13, which is Francis's. Oh, can I go back? Okay, Francis's very first film with Roger Corman, and we were able to get the elements. Unfortunately, it fell into public domain at that time, but we were able to get access to the original elements. The problem with Dementia 13 was going back to the history of Francis becoming a filmmaker and understanding the right to have the final cut. And he didn't have final cut on this. And Roger Corman, when Francis left, decided, I'd like a little more comedy in this horror. And so he added a little poacher in it. It was like, and Francis was like, if I ever have material, I want to take care of this. So we for Dementia 13, we made a director's cut of this, and it's very similar to George Romero and The Night of the Living Dead. We were able to copyright this for his particular version. But now, as Kevin has said, he's touched his films 3 times, 4 times, and we'll continue doing it. Now I'm going back full circle. Now we're around 4K, Blu-ray is out, and now I'm going Apocalypse Now again. And yes, Francis heard people's discussion originally in 2000 that it was too long and the French plantation was a problem, which he still doesn't think is a problem and still wants it and was still in the final cut, but we made other trims and other cuts. But the nice thing about as technology grows, Francis is always thinking about presentation, what he wanted to do in 1979 that he wasn't able to do. We were able to do Atmos, the helicopters flying overhead. You got the sense around, what is the earthquake sound technology? Sense around, which gave you that low frequency rumble that scares the hell out of you. It's just the hair standing out the back of your neck. And that's what he wanted when the arc light, the bombs were going off. He wanted you to feel it in your gut before you heard it. And so there was new speakers that were coming out for Final Cut in 2019 that he really wanted to experiment with. So out of these restorations come new ideas and trying to push forward ideas that he had 40 years ago, but wasn't able to do now. But all the while, when we release these DVDs or Blu-rays or home video, we're making sure that the 79 version was there, a Redux, because it makes a great package in the cell, you know. So, and then again, we're revisiting One from the Heart. And I'll say One from the Heart, what was different between 2003 when I was first thing is like it didn't have its own name, you know. So it was still kind of murky what it really wanted to be. So I never thought it was sort of a hybrid that was sort of tinkering with an idea. And it wasn't really until like the last year where he's like, okay, this is its own version that sets it apart from what I was doing in 1982. Are these the last time we're going to touch them? I don't know. But lastly, I'll end with this one because this was also another thing. Sometimes restorations come out of the necessity to finish something for a studio. Francis was told he needed to finish The Godfather 3 in 1991 by Christmas, and he would make a certain amount of money if he did it. And he was like, oh, sure. And he just handed whatever was done. But him and Walter Murch, as an editor, came right back into the studio to recut it. So whatever people saw in home video that decade was not the version anyone saw in the theaters. It was what people saw on VHS. But that was definitely, for Francis, not the definitive version. And he said, well, you know, the problem is I was listening to George, and we'll come back to start the story with George. And those two, they worked off each other, you know, and ideas. And he said, you know, George had an idea of how to start the film, put a certain scene in the middle. And he's like, nah, I thought that was wrong. I want to take the middle and I want to put it at the beginning and start it right off. So that's kind of the impetus of this. It's just, he's a man that loves, how can I change the story? How can I tell it differently? How can I go from, you know, an audience in 79's perspective is one way, but 30 years an audience could be look at it differently, and they maybe understand it differently. And it doesn't say this was right or wrong, but it just tells you storytelling. It could be just told in different ways, you know. And he's always very much in the mind of how can I tell the story differently, better or worse. And it doesn't say that these newer versions are better, but it just shows, just as a filmmaker, how his thought process is through the way. So there will be more. He's always, even his last film, Megalopolis, I'm sure we're going back on it, you know. So, hey, we still licking our wounds after that, but he's still thinking about how I can tinker with it. So his process hasn't stopped, and he's continuing. So anyway, I thank you for having me, and I will turn it on to the next person.
Is Grover Crisp.
There you go. This one. Thanks. All right. Everything's really been interesting so far. I love it. So hopefully this is of interest too, although it's not about restoration or preservation. It's a little bit different. And we're going to start, if I got the right, there you go. So Screen Snapshots were a series of short films made at Columbia Pictures for decades. And we're going to look at one of those. However, I have a bit of a prologue to tell you a little bit about how this came about. So I'm going to jump back and forth in time. There was a gentleman named Morris Cashin, and in the 20s, mid to late 20s, he put out a series of collectible cards. They were called Cashin Motion Picture Stars, and it was a series of collectible photos of stars with their autographs, and you know, fans could buy them. That is one of the boxes. It's the front of one of the boxes of the collection, and this was the back. And you could see that in a box you could buy. You had 4 sets, and 96 photos altogether. This is a little close-up of that. You'll notice at the top up there, Richard Barthelmess. Richard Barthelmess was a well-known silent film star. And this is some of the cards. And Richard Barthelmess up in the upper right-hand corner. I mention that because he's one of the stars of Only Angels Have Wings tonight. So this was something that was pretty successful for this guy, Morris Cashin. However, in the mid-teens, he was a motion picture exhibitor in Montreal, and he managed some theater circuits. And he decided, he was very much into promotions, and he thought it would be great if we had a series, if we could get audiences more involved. So he set up a series of short films called Screen Letterbox, not Letterbox the way we think of it nowadays. And the idea was that patrons and theaters could fill out cards with questions for their favorite stars and then drop it in the box. This would go to his production company, and then they would make a short film out of that. And it was a silent era, so there were cards with the questions and the person who submitted it and, you know, where they lived and that kind of thing. And then they would have the answer to the question. And the questions were all kinds of things like, you know, where does Douglas Fairbanks live? Or how much money does Charlie Chaplin make? That kind of thing. The answer to that question I saw was as much as he can get. So I don't know how detailed they got. Anyway, he hired Jack Cohn. Jack Cohn was one of, he and his brother later formed Columbia Pictures, but prior to that, Jack was working in a variety of functions at different places, with Carl Laemmle's production company, for one thing. And he hired Jack Cohn to produce these short films. And the first one came out in mid-July of 1919. And the idea was to put out a couple, you know, like every couple of weeks, one every couple of weeks. And I guess Morris Cashin thought it was really successful, so he bought out Cohn's interest in the company in early September of 1919. They were about to release their 8th one, which was called Screen Letterbox number 8, in mid-September, which they did, and then promptly went out of business. So that ended that. They only made 8 of those. I'm not aware of more than one that has been preserved, and you can actually see it on the National Film Preservation Foundation website, which is nfpf.org, and we preserved that one short. It's number 5, and full disclosure, I'm the chairman of that foundation, so I'm really happy that happened. It was a project with George Eastman Museum. So, but the idea stuck with Jack Cohn, and 8 months later, he produced the first screen snapshots. And these shorts were all meant to be celebrities at work and play, playing golf, attending rodeos, motion picture premieres, that kind of thing. They were all narrated. They're all about 10 minutes long. And they ran from May of 1920, when it premiered, until 1958. And they did about 20 to 25 a year of these, so there are hundreds of them. They all are, if you've seen one, you've pretty much seen all hundreds of them. They're pretty much the same, except for the one we're going to show tonight. I should have gone on to this next slide here. So this was one of the, like a lobby card, that would indicate the kinds of celebrities you're going to see. Some you might know, some you might not. Charlie Chaplin is way down the list down there. And then this was the promo that Cohn sent out to exhibitors to get them interested in booking these screen snapshots. So the reason we're going to watch one is because it was not like the others. And in this instance, one of Frank Capra's early 30s films was going into production, and they decided to do a short little piece about as much of every function of making a motion picture that they could, from the script to the casting to the shooting to the editing to the development of the film in the laboratory and all that kind of stuff, including shipping the prints out. So, and it's all that technical stuff in the second half of it that we found really interesting. So with that, and to cut short this thing, let's go ahead and watch the short.
Now we have Bill Morrison.
Thanks. Such a pleasure to be back here, and thanks for Julia for inviting me back. I started at art school at Cooper Union in the 1980s, and my animation professor was the great animator Robert Breer, and I learned rotoscoping under him. I actually had an internship with Dave Fleischer, who I imagine is your cousin, and in the Animation Consortium. I don't know if you remember that. And I became interested in making animated films, and then more how to deconstruct or animate films that had already been shot. From that, I became interested in how that had happened organically, and that led me to looking at like the paper print collection at the Library of Congress, how films were shot and then returned to paper and then were reanimated. And eventually I was in Film Forum, I guess in 1991, where I saw Peter Delput's Lyrical Nitrate and saw how nitrate could organically animate a picture, decomposing nitrate. And I was at a Orphans Film Symposium, in the first one in 1999 in Columbia, South Carolina, where I had the chance to visit the Fox Movietone newsreel library, as it was known then, now known as Moving Image Research Collection, and typed in, I think, emulsion deterioration, and got hundreds, if not thousands, of hits. And so I modified that to severe emulsion deterioration and got something like 151 hits. And from that, I constructed a film that's known as Decasia, which is mostly made of deteriorated nitrate clips, and I showed that at a Orphans Film Symposium, perhaps in 2002, and a gentleman introduced himself to me. This was George Williman, the nitrate vault manager of what was then the Library of Congress at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and outside of Columbus, or outside of Dayton, and he said, "Oh, I have this film you should have put in Decasia." And I was like, "Well, George, I already finished Decasia, but I'd be happy to, see what you're talking about." And I flew to Dayton, and I spent a few days in Wright-Patterson, and he showed me this print that was redundant of James Young's The Bells, which had several reels that showed remarkable, I can even say from this perspective, decades later, remarkable nitrate deterioration, in that the reel was not stuck together. It unleafed beautifully, and there was an incredible animation that imbued the picture with a different spirit than the original it had. We sent that to Cinema Arts, the lab in Pennsylvania, in Hamlin, Pennsylvania, or outside Hamlin, and they did a optical reprint for me at my specifications, and that became a short film I call Light is Calling, which we're going to look at now, and then I'll talk a little bit more. Thanks. So I'm interested in preservation from a completely different angle than most people in this room. I guess despite the fact that Marty and I share the same birthday, we have very different concerns. So anyway, after that, George and I became great buddies, and after the nitrate collection moved to the brand new Packard campus of audiovisual conservation in Culpeper, Virginia, I would make annual pilgrimages there, and these kind of nitrates that had been found in, as you said, the barns and sheds, and nervous offspring were shipping them to each one with a different story, and usually a daughter or granddaughter, I have to say. Usually the owner wanted $1 million for his nitrate or whatever he thought it was valuable. And I just found these nitrate shipping cans so beautiful that are on display there. But eventually they are cleaned and given a number. And as Alain René says in Tout le Mémoire du Monde, they're made viewable before God. And so these are the vaults of the clean things, but not everything gets there. And some things are deemed unsalvageable, and that's where I come in. Here's George, and sometimes things get designated with my name, which I take as a great honor, but I know that in archival communities, my name is sometimes used as a verb. Or they say it went all Bill Morrison on us. This is George hamming it up. I'm sorry George couldn't be here, but under the government lockdown, he was unable to travel, tragically. But these are things that he couldn't transfer and were slated for, hazardous waste pickup. Sometimes, I just love this stuff. That is actually the bottom of the hazardous waste pickup can. So that's, but sometimes it gets this tape with my name on it, or a Post-it note, so this is in 45-degree vaults and 45-degree humidity. And so I would go down there in my hoodie and search through the vaults. And there's underneath, this is, I believe, D.W. Griffith's The Unchanging Sea. I was going to show a compilation of that, but I believe we're running out of time. I am showing a short before the Sarah Driver film in the afternoon session called Ghost of the Past, so that will have to suffice. And we're not going to show the film after the PowerPoint. These are things that were, I was able to reel through and see that they could transfer well. We'd send them to a color lab, and they became part of my archive for new work. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. And yes, his film plays at 1:30 before You're Not I with Sarah Driver's film. And normally this is when we open it. And we had invited George Willeman of the Library of Congress, because the Library of Congress is really hard to translate how much they do for film preservation. And unfortunately, he can't be here because of the shutdown. So we will have him another time. Normally this is when we open it to question, but we are running late. So my suggestion would be we all go upstairs and make the branch a more sort of interactive question and answer session. So I want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank the audience, and I want to thank in particular Suzanne Hardwood, who is our festival patron, and she's been a big advocate for this program, and so we're very grateful that she got it from the first time.